Hi, Jeff. It's great to have you with us. Um, as we speak, a red warning for extreme high temperatures was extended in Romania. I cannot imagine a better time for reading the book Heat Will Kill You First in our country. So, what are the key messages for this book?
The clear message is, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be doing this. The clear messages from my book are that extreme heat is a deadly force. It is a risk that most people don't understand how dangerous it is, and that it is something that is unlike other climate-related risks like drought or sea level rise or wildfires or melting glaciers. Heat is something that can kill you very quickly. And the key idea of my book is to understand how that happens, what the risks are, and what you can do to make sure that that doesn't happen to you and to your loved ones. And also more broadly, what we need to do politically, how we need to change the design of our cities, how we need to change where we get our energy to help address these risks.
So, your book describes the terrifying effects of the global warming, but you criticize this term because global warming just sounds like better beach weather. What expression should I use instead?
Well, I do criticize the language that we use to talk about climate change or the climate crisis. I kind of prefer the phrase climate crisis because it gives some sense of the urgency of this. Others have used the word climate emergency. None of these words or these phrases capture the full kind of risk of the scope and scale of the risks that we face from extreme heat and from our rapidly warming world. But the phrase global warming is particularly troubling to me because it just suggests better beach weather. It just suggests that, maybe we should, just go to the lake and hang out and put on shorts and kind of enjoy it. And it really doesn't capture the scale of the risks that we face as our world heats up and as heat waves and other climate events get more and more extreme.
Good. So, on Saturday, the Guardian titled The Story of a Heat Death. David went to work in his new job on a French building site. By the end of the day, he was dead. 2022 was Europe's hottest ever summer. It has since been surpassed by the summer of last year, and probably the trend will continue. In 2022, 59,900 similar articles could have been written in Europe, yeah, according to a recent study you mentioned. So, do you intend to write another book about extreme heat?
No, I'm not going to write another book about extreme heat, not immediately. I am going to write another book about the climate crisis. I'm still working on that, about exactly what it will be. But you're right, this story could have been written a number of times earlier. And one of the kind of mysteries that motivated me to write this book is the fact that it hadn't been. I think that the risks of extreme heat have been widely underappreciated. In fact, I didn't appreciate those risks. I've been writing about climate change for 20 years, and I always, I never really understood the risks of heat myself until I happened to be in Phoenix, Arizona on a very hot day. I was late for a meeting. It was about 50 C in Phoenix that day. And I had to run about 20 blocks to a meeting. And by the time I got to that meeting, my heart was pounding. I was dizzy. I was lightheaded. And I realized how in just a span of 10 minutes, how dangerous, my kind of exposure to heat became. And I think that that's broadly how a lot of people didn't think about heat. I think that it has to do partly with the fact that heat is not visible. We don't see it. I'm looking out my window right now, and I can't tell if it's 30 C or 50 C by looking out the window. And I think it's partly because of, even among people who care and think about climate change, it's often talked about as this far away and distant threat. It's something that is happening to glaciers a long way away, or that is a risk for our children or future generations. We still have not grasped how dangerous it is and how much it is changing our world right now.
So in February, you wrote, if 2023 taught me one thing, it is this: whatever moves you, whatever you find beautiful and inspiring in this world, take a good look at it now, because it might not be there for long. What taught you 2024 so far?
Yeah, well, I think about that every day. I think about it every time I look at I go for a walk and I look at a tree, or I go for a walk and I see people passing by, or I see the way the city I live in, Austin, Texas, is built. I realize it's not going to be the same way in a very short time, largely because of climate change. It's changing everything. And one of the for me, very profound realizations of writing about climate change is realizing, just how temporary, our arrangement of civilization kind of really is. And our world is heating up rapidly, that we are getting more and more extreme weather events of all kinds. That is just going to accelerate. And that's going to mean a lot of loss, a lot of changes, a lot of differences in our world. When I go to the beach, I realize that rising seas are going to change the shape of this beach very quickly, and that for my children, this beach may not be there. In fact, it may not be there in the similar way when I come back in 10 years. So I think this idea that our world is changing fast, for better and for worse in some ways, is really an important thing for me that has come out of this for me. And in a way, it has made my life more vivid, because when I look at something, whether it's a butterfly or a highway overpass, I realize that it won't be there for long. And that, this is in some way an understanding of mortality, but it is also an understanding of what climate change is doing to our world. Summer is not the same thing as it used to be when you and I grew up. We have a different idea about summer now, because it's hotter, because it's more extreme, because it's more difficult to go outside. So climate change is affecting, not only our physical lives, but in my view, the way we literally see the world.
In connection with that, what are some of the things you've learned about yourself over your years as a climate change author?
That's a very interesting question. What have I learned about myself? Well, I think, on the simplest level, I've pursued this climate change story for more than 20 years now, because I really do think it's the great story of our time. I think it's the most important story of human civilization. It's our relationship with the climate that has given us life. Here in America, we're dealing with, an election. There's a lot of talk about the future of democracy. There's a lot of talk about, what this election will mean for the NATO alliance. We're talking about funding for the Ukraine war. We're talking about what Putin is doing. All that stuff is really important and urgent. And this is, obviously a volatile time in the sort of Western world, especially. But pulling back even from that, a lot of the climate change story is sort of bigger and in its own way kind of more urgent, in my view. And so one of the things that's happened to me that has changed me in covering this is this ability to sort of pull back and see in a larger way how everything is connected, you know, the holistic aspect of our lives on this planet, you know, that we can talk about Vladimir Putin and, you know, you can connect, you know, I mean, funding for, you know, his autocratic rulership comes out of oil, right? Money from oil, and that's connected to very directly to climate change. And you can connect that then to the change of, you know, the migration of various animals, and you can change that to the decline of the Great Barrier Reef, and you can connect that to the rise of electric cars and the changing of geopolitics related to mining of lithium. I mean, when you start thinking about it in a bigger sense, all of these threads connect and you begin to see this sort of larger transformation that our world is going through.
So one of your biggest fears is that the world will adapt to heat deaths, much like it did with COVID. And I wonder, we will ever learn to live with the extreme heat? Did we already? Can we live with it?
Well, I think that the key question there is who we is, right? I mean, Elon Musk, you know, thinks we can live on Mars. He can live on Mars, that he can develop a civilization on Mars. And certainly if you spend billions and billions of dollars and you have access to all the best technology, it's perfectly plausible that, you know, a human civilization could live on Mars. You know, we live in all kinds of extreme climates. The question is who and at what expense, and, you know, is that how you want to live? Do you want to go live on Mars and, you know, live in a space capsule or a dome, you know, billions or millions of miles away from, light years away from your family and the earth that gave us life? I mean, it's a similar thing. You know, people ask me, I live in Austin, Texas, which is a very hot place in America. And people say, well, how much longer will people want to live in Austin, Texas? And, you know, people will want to live here for a long time. There's no question that if you have a lot of money and you can buy air conditioning and you can buy solar power and microgrids so you're sure that your power is not going to go out, and you don't have a job where you're laying asphalt in the street on a summer day, and you have good medical care and things like that, and you don't care about changing of food prices and things, you can survive in these kinds of places. But a lot of people can't. And a lot of people are going to die. And there's going to be a lot of loss and suffering as our world heats up. And that's why I call heat a kind of predatory force in my book. It goes after the most vulnerable people first. And those vulnerable people are not going to be able to survive in these hotter, more extreme kinds of climates. And we're going to see a lot of loss. And the question is A, do we care? And B, what are the political consequences of that? And C, what are we going to do about it?
Speaking of that, air conditioning is not a cooling technology at all. It's simply a tool for heat redistribution. But you know what? I had to move for a few days in an Airbnb apartment in my hometown. I don't have AC at home. I've just moved in a new home. I live in a flat, and apparently I cannot install a heat pump there. So after 55 years in the same city, I wouldn't leave it only because it's been hot for a month or so. So what to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, air conditioning is a fascinating subject, you know, and I'm not anti-air conditioning. Air conditioning is a survival tool in our ever increasingly hot world. I have it in this room I'm sitting in right now. I wrote the bulk of this book in an air-conditioned space. I understand the value of air conditioning, and you know, one of the goals of making hot cities and hot places more survivable for more people is getting more access to air conditioning. The city of Portland, Oregon, where there was an extreme heat wave in 2021, which I wrote about in my book. In the aftermath of that, that heat wave, they put in a program to give away air conditioning units to poor families. And I think their goal is to give away 20,000 air conditioning units. My problem with air conditioning is that it's often seen as a simple techno fix for a hotter world. I give talks around the world all the time, and inevitably people will say to me, well, I understand heat is a problem and I hate it when it gets really hot and I know it's dangerous, but we have air conditioning, so we're going to fix this. And the problem is air conditioning is not a techno fix. It is not a simple solution to a very complex problem. For one thing, there are 750 million people on the planet who don't even have access to electricity, much less air conditioning. So those people, it's going to be a very, very, very long time, if ever, that these people are ever going to have access to air conditioning. So it's a solution for a certain kind of, elite Western, relatively wealthy portion of the world. Second of all, we are not, heat impacts more than just us humans. And, we are not going to air condition the oceans. We are not going to air condition the forests. We are not going to air condition the fields where our crops grow. So, it doesn't do anything for all of the other many, many problems related to a rapidly warming world. And third of all, as I wrote an op-ed or an opinion piece for the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about, the cascading risks that air conditioning sets us up for. Because of our dependence on air conditioning, we've forgotten, we meaning broadly, the Western world, how to build buildings with natural ventilation systems that have deliberately designed circulation patterns that cool the building off. I mean, anyone who's traveled to India or to Mexico or to other hot places know that or Greece, they know how to build buildings for hot weather using white paints, orienting them away from the sun, planting big trees near the buildings, creating kind of wind areas so that there's a sort of natural cooling corridors, all kinds of things. Now we just build glass and steel and concrete boxes and bolt-in air conditioning. And the problem is that's great until the power goes out. And if you have a blackout, a loss of power, which happens more and more on hot days because everybody is turning on their air conditioning and it strains the grid, then you're in big trouble because these buildings that were built for air conditioning become like convection ovens, and they become very dangerous. And I think that risk of a perpetually air-conditioned world, even for the sort of wealthy elites who can afford it, is vastly underappreciated.
So good. You said that we need to rebuild our world, but what are the signs that makes you think that we can do that?
Well, we don't have any choice. I mean, first of all, we're going to do it. We can't continue, building our, fossil fuels and doing things in the same old way. It's just, a kind of Mad Max vision of the future. And Mad Max is a famous futuristic movie that is, full of chaos and murder and mayhem. I mean, I think that, one of the things that inspires me as a journalist writing about climate change is seeing how much changes there really is already happening and how many people are working hard on thinking about that. And that connects with, we were just talking about buildings. It connects with architects and urban planners thinking differently about how they design buildings. Here in Texas, which is the ancestral homeland in the United States of fossil fuels, right now, I just checked this morning, 70% of the power on our electric power grid is coming from renewable energy. The decline in prices because of technological innovation, the decline in prices of renewable power is astonishing. we are seeing people, Paris is a great example of a city that is, because of the strong political leadership of the mayor, has made amazing progress in reimagining an iconic European city for the, a more extreme climate of the 21st century. And even the Paris Olympics, they're using this platform as a way of showing how you can redevelop buildings, how you can reuse buildings, how you can do things in a different and sustainable way. Even the controversial decision of, using the Seine for the triathlon and cleaning up the Seine and making the Seine again a place of a public space where people can go and cool off on hot days. I mean, I think that Paris is really leading the way and showing how we can address a lot of these problems of this more extreme climate we're living in, and building in a more sustainable, humanistic kind of way, without people often talk, well, we're not going to go back to living in caves and giving up progress and everything. And what's happening in Paris is really, showing that there is a way forward, that we can do this in a different way and build a better world. It's not about stopping progress. It's about accelerating progress.
What do you do when you read comments made by climate deniers? Those who claim on social media that wind and solar energy don't actually work?
Well, I read comments on social media about people who think the Earth is flat and that aliens walk among us. And, nothing I'm going to say or you're going to write or is going to change those people's minds, right? Climate change has become a kind of tribal issue. That if your group of friends or political allies think that climate change is a farce, you're more likely to see that climate change is a farce. The rejection of science in the sort of far right movement, both in Europe and in the United States, worries me a lot. That is a big cultural and political trend that is very dangerous. But for myself, I don't pretend that anything I can say or write in 10 or 15 minutes, or, say in 10 or 15 minutes, or write in X number of pages is going to change any of these people's minds. So other people are kind of good at addressing that. I am not really interested in that. I'm interested in reaching people who understand that climate change is real, who know that there's a link between burning fossil fuels and putting CO2 in the atmosphere and the warming of our world. This is very clear science. It's been known for 100 years. There's nothing complicated about it. But who don't really grasp the real scope and scale of what it means. People who say, yes, our world is getting hotter. I know it is hotter now than it was when I grew up, but so what? It's only a little bit hotter. What's the big deal? I want to help educate those people. I want to reach those people. Those are the people I want to read my book, who will say, oh, I didn't realize that heat was so dangerous. I didn't realize that heat is involved in the changing of disease patterns, because we have mosquitoes now who are very sensitive to heat moving to new areas, bringing things like Zika and malaria and dengue fever with us. I didn't realize that small changes, 1 degree change in the ocean temperature, for example, in the Southern Ocean, is having huge implications for the ice sheets in Antarctica and are going to change sea levels around the world in a very dramatic way. I didn't realize that outdoor work on a hot day was so dangerous. I thought that if it was hot, if I just drank water, I will be okay. I mean, there's a lot of things that people don't get about this. And for me, that's the people I read this book. People who have a general basic understanding of the consequences and risks we face in detail. And I want this book to reach those kinds of people, not only to help them understand the risks of this rapidly warming world, but what we can do about it.
So, Jeff, as a New York Times best-selling author and a respected long-time writer for Rolling Stone, what is the state of journalists today, in your opinion?
Well, the state of journalism, that's a long and complicated story. You know, it has been driven by, you know, the digital transformation, right? The change in how we get information, the increasing, kind of siloing of information and polarization of our political world, which has also polarized our media world. So you have, far kind of left silos of media, and then far right and less stuff in the middle, less trusted voices. It has to do with this larger decline in trusted institutions, whether it's government or science or media. People don't trust experts. They think that everybody's opinion about what's happening with climate change that they read on X or on Facebook or whatever other social media platform they're paying attention to, that they're all sort of equal. And
Jeff,
that's,
sorry for interrupting. What happened with the facts?
yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. What happened with the facts? And this idea that facts are something to be negotiated, that there is no idea of a fact anymore. There's just an opinion, right? And that's one of the things that is so, to me, so compelling about writing about climate change is that, the climate doesn't care about your opinion. It doesn't care about whether you believe in it or not. It's happening. It's physics. It's very straightforward. It is the ultimate kind of reality show is climate change. And so for me, it's very interesting watching how that ultimate reality show of climate change kind of interacts with the increasing polarization of our world. And as a journalist, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about this because I just feel like my job is very simple, which is to tell the truth as I see it, to do my best to craft a story. I think stories are really important. I think a lot of journalism gets too distracted and by data and numbers and graphs. And climate change is essentially a story about science, and I see myself as a kind of translator of that science into sort of human speak. But how this plays out in our increasingly polarized media world, and what can be done to bring to sort of reestablish the credibility of journalists and things, I don't know. And I just focus on writing the best books I can, telling the truth as I see it, being as fair-minded. I think it's really important to be fair about all this, to really, and also to understand what you're writing about. I mean, I think a lot of writing about climate change is flawed by journalists who don't really understand it, I've done 1,000 interviews since my book was published all around the world. And, I get asked the same sort of silly questions all the time by well-intentioned journalists, who will say, are we doomed or are we not doomed? And, that's such a kind of brain dead question, right? Because it's not a binary, it's not like a flip of a coin, right? It's like, well, of course we're not doomed. Of course we have a lot of agency we can do, a lot of things that, that we can change. And so, when I look at the flaws of the media, I think a lot of it is also, we have to look at ourselves, a lot of, and my lens on this is through climate change. And in my interaction with a lot of other journalists who were talking to me about my book and things, they just are pretty ignorant about a lot of it. And it's complicated, and I understand that. But it's also your job and my job to if you're going to talk to me about this, it's your job to have read my book. And if I'm going to write this book, it's my job to have read the papers that I cite and to understand what I'm talking about and to be able to defend them, you know. And I think too many journalists are basically not doing their jobs.
One more question, the last one. Jeff, why do you write?
Well, I think excuse me, I write because it's what I'm good at, you know, and I think our job is to do what we're good at and aim that talent towards the betterment of our world, right? In the simplest way. If I were, you know, asked to, people ask me, you know, are you a political activist? And I'm like, no, I'm not a political activist because I don't know how to arrange a political movement. I know nothing about that. I would be the last person you would want leading the charge on any issue, whether it's climate change or abortion or capital punishment or whatever. That's not my skill. You know, I have a skill for telling a story that I don't know why I have that skill, but it is what I do well. And I write because it's what I do well. And because I think like most people, you know, we want to feel like our life, our work, which we spend so much time doing, has some meaning, that that it has some influence on the world. I don't pretend to think that, you know, I'm going to solve climate change, but I do like the feeling that I'm contributing in some small way to a greater kind of understanding of this, you know. And people often, you know, the denier, you brought up the sort of denier crowd, and they will often on social media and other places accuse me of being like a grifter, you know, that I am profiting off of climate change, that I'm being quietly paid by George Soros or some other crazy, you know, billionaire. And it's like, it's so insulting because first of all, if my goal were to make money and get rich, the last thing I would be doing is write about climate change. There are a lot of other ways, trust me, to get rich and famous than to write about climate change. And second of all, if I were interested, if, you know, the best story that I could tell about climate change that would make me rich and famous would be, oh, I've been writing about this for 20 years. I know all the top scientists and politicians involved in this, and I can tell you it's a hoax. I've figured this out. Now, I would sell 12 billion copies of my book. I would become a rock star of journalism. But that's not the story. That's not what's happening, you know? So, you know, I write because I want to inch the world on in a direction of greater understanding, greater respect for the awesomeness of this world that we live in, and, you know, a little more thoughtfulness and caretaking of that awesome world.
Thank you so much. It was a great answer. And thank you so much for your time, Jeff. It was really a pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you so much. It's great questions, and I really appreciate talking to you.